Next round, what do we need to do? Where do we go from here? You know, you always count yourself lucky to be at a conference, and I think there's an obligation there, and certainly part of the obligation is to decide now what action you're going to take next Monday. We'll let you have Friday off. Next Monday when you get back to the office. Well, one I think is clear, to recognize that, by golly, we are effective, you can be effective, we can do something about the spread of computer-related crime. The next thing is to realize that to be effective in this area, we've got to widen our scope a little bit. We've got to take on the obligations you and I have from our jobs to get involved not in each case, but in the whole environment in which these cases arise. And that means we've got to get off our duff, we've got to get active in the development of the law, and perhaps more importantly, the development of the law and legislation that goes with it. There is a group called the Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility. And they are very active in Washington, and they are very active in sponsoring conferences. We should be as active. I'm afraid I offended some members of the board of that group at a conference where I said that I was all for computer professionals for social responsibility. I'm not quite sure to this day what a computer professional is, and that I suggested they might change their title, and rather than computer professionals for social responsibility, become the sociable professionals for responsible computing. But that really baits the question. It was a cheap shot, and it was unworthy of the conference. There are a lot of conferences going on. At the last time we were in a major conference with CPSR, with EFF, with the people from the academic and government access that play so big a part. The people on the panel, Mark Rash, who prosecuted Robert Morris, and I, and Ken Rosenblatt from Santa Clara, prosecutors and police officers were in a distinct minority, FBI agents, Secret Service. We were outnumbered immensely, and I said in one of my speeches that we were really speaking for the absent victims and they should be here. That was the first conference on computers, privacy, and freedom. In fact, computers, freedom, and privacy. I always put freedom as the most significant, but it's computers, freedom, and privacy. You should be aware that the proceedings of that conference are commercially available. They were made available because the whole thing was taped by a Hollywood crew. It was sponsored by CPSR. And in the handout you've got with you is the address where to go to get information on these. I think if you're doing training of your people or in your local association, you should take a look at their brochure, which I'm holding here, and write for the brochure or call them, they'll send you one. Take a look at the people involved in this. These are some major names. I was privileged to be in their company, and some major issues were developed. The next conference is next March in the city of Washington, D.C. Nice time to be in Washington. I used to live there. This time it would be great if the people who are the targets, the people who are defending against these break-ins, the people who are the basic core of the victims, showed up in numbers and got a hold of Lance Hoffman at George Washington, who was putting the conference together, and told him, we'd like to be there. There was a very scant representation from the victim group at the last conference, and because these things translate into the academic world and into the legislative world, if we don't do something to balance the representation, we're going to lose the battle for public opinion. And if we lose that, we have lost stuff that we will never put back together. And this is not their fault. That's the irony of it. The fellow that put the conference together was on the phone continually with the major players out on the coast. Would you come to the conference? Would you participate? Would you help fund it? Would you show up and talk? There are an awful lot of cancellations. We don't want to be involved with a bunch of hippies and hackers. Bad decision. If we don't get in on the discussion, how can we sit back later when the laws have changed and public perception has changed and say, well, gee, you didn't understand the problem. The discussion is going on right now. As I speak, this is the Time magazine that is on the newsstand, and the whole issue is devoted to privacy. And look what leads off. How business, government, and even the folks next door track your secrets. Now, some of that material they talk about in here in a very well-written, I think, and perceptive article is exactly what we're talking about here. But if you're not going to be heard on why you do have to monitor, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it, and there's no reading for it. Many of the top people in your company are probably members of the ACM. The proceedings of the Association for Computing Machinery are a major high-level discussion of problems, not only computing machinery problems, but the problems of the Constitution. Dorothy Denning, now up in put Georgetown, I believe, in charge of their department, formerly head of security for DEC, wrote the major article on the whole Nidor, Steve Jackson, et cetera, case that launched a lot of discussion. Mr. Don Parker has participated, Mr. Newhouse. You've got a lot of people here who participate in those discussions. Well, by golly, if you're in the security business, you ought to get the copy of their magazine that your company already subscribes to and take a look at it. See where the discussion is going. See where the action takes on. I think that's very important. The last item I mentioned in the outline is the riders of the Internet. As you probably know, Congress has spent a great deal of money and a great deal of consideration to make the Internet faster. I have talked at several colleges lately, and every time one of the professors comes up to me after I talk about the Internet situation, which was the Robert Morris target, and says, well, you know, we've got Internet access too. I've got my own code number. The thing is spreading all over the place. There's a lot of files on there, a lot of information passing through there. With all the money to speed it up and to expand it, very, very little has gone into making it more secure. And that's a fortunate thing. That's the thing that ought to be being addressed. But those are the areas, publicly supported, where the information is now moving and the decisions and the whole framework of the discussion is going on. What I'm suggesting is that you and I have an obligation. Maybe we're the straights, we're the suits, we're the ties, but by golly, we also are most of the country. And we're the ones that are going to keep this country going and keep it free for the next few years. We've got to get in on the discussion. This is the book, Computers at Risk, published this or last year by the National Research Council. You ought to have a copy. Runs for about $20. Company will pay for it. It's a very good analysis of everything we've talked about, probably everything that's going on in the risk area. I strongly recommend this book, Spectacular Computer Crimes by Buck Bloombecker. I hope he brought some to the conference he can autograph. I've got to get him to autograph mine one of these days. Good book, a very strong, the strongest I've seen representation of the civil liberties concerns in all of this, and I learned a lot from it. The newest book out in the area is one I also hardly recommend, Cyberpunk. This is by Katie Hefner and John Markoff. These are good writers. It's a study of 3 cases. The one in the middle is the Pengo case that I referred to. This is the case that Cliff Stoll's Cuckoo's Egg was all about. But he also covers Mitnick, and he also covers the Morris situation. He and she do it, both. Excellent book, and if you're trying to sell to management what's going on, this is the kind of published material you want. Now, for your own continuing education, in addition to the publications of the Computer Security Institute, I strongly recommend that you start grabbing these things at Lyra. These are the throwaway papers. This is Microtimes published here. This is Computer Currents. I think it's published all over the country. Interesting stuff, what's going on in computing, but also the discussion, and you begin to understand where this absolutely vital part of the mainstream of the economy is coming from, what the developments are, and with your training, where the risks are. And this, I think, is a professional obligation in the security business. It's a professional obligation that we owe not only to our employer, but to our community. And I wish I were back there with you to be able to discuss this with you on one-to-one. I apologize for the unfortunate collision between my workload and the prospect of the conference. I would again very much like to thank the Computer Security Institute and everybody responsible for it for giving me this opportunity, and I'm sorry I let them down. I hope this patches up to some extent what's going on, because computers are not a crime of the future. They're the crime of now. They're a crime that's going on as you sit there. Somebody is misusing the greatest freeing, communicating, exciting technology we've ever had for criminal purposes, and we need your help to do something about it. The important thing is that in doing something about it, we not lose sight of the fact that we live in a country with a commitment first to rights. It's 200 years old this year, the Bill of Rights. It's a good document. It showed a lot of work. It's what makes a distinction between what we do in the United States and what every other country now coming out of oppression has in mind. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And arising from all of this, a concept of a right of privacy. That privacy is essential if we're going to keep this kind of society you want for your kids and I want for mine. I'm sure in the rest of the conference you'll do that which you can. to ensure that we're capable of doing that effectively and efficiently with one eye on the rights of the individual. Time is up. I know there's going to be some discussion here, but I've got to go serve some search warrants, get back to work. Thank you for watching. We'll try to see you at one of your other conferences.